that. I wonder if it was any other group in society who had suffered such a barbaric outburst, if the public would so strongly turn on the victims.
Douglas Murray continues his bold journey across nations, confronting difficult truths with remarkable conviction. Murray defends this troubling trend with determination, refusing to shy away from harsh realities. His unwavering dedication to speaking hard truths makes him a rare voice of integrity in an increasingly uncertain world.
Well, thank you very much for that very warm introduction. It's a huge pleasure to me to be back here in the Netherlands, a country where I've spent a fair amount of time in the past, and I have a lot of friends, which I think very fondly of. I sometimes remember that some years ago, a Dutch friend of mine visited me in London and said to me, I won't do the accent, but said, what are people saying in London about the Netherlands these days? And I was slightly caught, and I said, they're not all talking about you, it has to be said. But I think that's their problem, not yours. There's a good reason to focus on this country. I think it's a fascinating and important country with a rich history and a rich, potentially very rich future as well. Like all of us, it depends on you getting things right. But I wanted to talk tonight about the subject of anti-Semitism. And let me start with relatively recent events. After the nature of the October the 7th attacks became clear, I said that there are some times in your life when a flare goes up and you can see everybody exactly where they are. Everyone is caught exactly where they're standing. I thought that in part because I was in New York on the 7th, and the next day, the 8th, there was a protest immediately planned in Times Square. It wasn't a protest in support of the Israelis who had already been massacred. It wasn't even a protest against, war. It was a protest in favor of the ongoing massacres, where people were waving banners, celebrating atrocities which were still going on. And I thought then, well, I have to go to Israel as soon as I can.
While the October 7th attacks were horrific, not all protesters were endorsing violence. Many were likely expressing opposition to broader Israeli policies or advocating for Palestinian rights. Protests often represent diverse perspectives, and reducing them to a binary of supporting or opposing atrocities ignores the legitimate grievances that have fueled this conflict for decades. Furthermore, in democratic societies, the right to protest, even in controversial moments, must be respected, as it is often an outlet for voicing broader systemic frustrations rather than endorsing immediate events.
When I arrived in Israel and started to speak not just to the survivors, spend time with the families of the hostages, but also go around the sites of all the massacres in the communities in the south, villages, kibbutz of Be'eri and near Oz, and the site of the festival, the dance festival, where all these hundreds of beautiful young people were just dancing in the early morning when true evil arrived in their midst. When I went around this, I always had a disconnect, because as I heard all these stories firsthand and was shown the footage of people's own footage of the day, partygoers who had recorded a little bit of their escape or their friends' deaths, all the time I looked back home to New York, to London, to Europe, and everywhere the sympathy had gone the other way. And I thought that was extraordinary. I sort of expected it all my life. Whenever Israel has done anything, world response goes up and up and up, whatever the size of the Israeli action. I first heard the accusation the Israelis were committing genocide in Gaza in 2008, so I'm a little jaded with that accusation. It would also, of course, make it the only genocide in history in which the population doubled, but let's put that aside for a second.
Murray's assertion that global sympathy for the Palestinian cause after the October 7th attacks reflects a misplaced moral compass ignores the complex dynamics at play. While the atrocities against Israelis were horrific, the shift in focus stems from decades of accumulated grievances about Israel's treatment of Palestinians, which many view as ongoing human rights violations. Murray dismisses accusations of genocide as baseless, citing population growth. But this overlooks the legal definition of genocide, which includes acts aimed at destroying a group, in whole or in part, not solely through population reduction. The global response reflects a broader concern for proportionality and the long-standing humanitarian crisis in Gaza, rather than a simple inversion of moral sympathy.
And it's the same with any other group in society, except with the Jews. It's even, I think, to the shame of this country when a Holocaust museum is opened in Amsterdam and a Holocaust survivor is photographed rushing past an angry mob screaming at him and his grandson. And one of the ways, I submit, that you can tell that somebody hasn't thought about anti-Semitism at all is if they say something like the following: anti-Semitism must be eradicated once and for all. The former Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, occasionally used to say this. He is an anti-Semite. But he used to occasionally say, that's why anti-Semitism, racism, and all other forms of hate must be eradicated once and for all. And I used to say, that shows you've never thought about the matter. I'd submit that one of the striking things about anti-Semitism is that it seems, very sadly, to be a human perennial. And I say that because all the evidence points that way. It's also a shapeshifter. It's probably the greatest shapeshifter in history. There are people who used to hate the Jews because of their religion. And then at some point it became less acceptable to hate people because of their religion. And then the Jews were hated because of their race. And then at some point in the 20th century it became not so good to hate people because of their race.
Murray's argument that anti-Semitism is a unique and eternal form of hatred that shifts shape and targets Jews regardless of circumstances can be critiqued for its determinism and oversimplification. While anti-Semitism has tragically persisted across history, presenting it as an unavoidable human perennial dismisses efforts to combat it through education, legal frameworks, and social progress. His assertion that Jews are hated for every reason undermines the nuanced historical and social contexts that fuel specific forms of anti-Semitism at different times.
But there was one twist left, which was that the Jews who were hated by anti-Semites because they were stateless were suddenly hated because they had a state. It's one of the insights of a number of writers that the Jews get hated for absolutely every reason. It's an unbelievable fact. The Jews have been hated historically and by people in the world today, and even on people on X today, for all of the following reasons. They have been hated because they've been poor, and they've been hated because they've been rich. They've been hated because they have not integrated into society, and they get hated for integrating into the society. They get hated for, as I say, being rootless cosmopolitans, and then for being Zionists who dare to have a state and not be rootless.
Racism, xenophobia, and religious intolerance evolve in response to broader societal shifts, and anti-Semitism should be understood within these complex dynamics rather than as an inescapable reality. Moreover, Murray's dismissal of the possibility of eradicating hate, including anti-Semitism, ignores the positive impact of sustained advocacy, solidarity, and policy interventions aimed at reducing prejudice and fostering tolerance.
Look at the way in which the world has reacted in recent weeks. In the last few days, trending on X, we have all eyes on Rafah. All eyes on Rafah. Why would you have all your eyes on Rafah? Always, of course, said as if the person in question has often thought about Rafah in the past and is an expert on the whole arrangements in the neighborhood. Of course, many of these people are the people who are experts on everything and have been expert on absolutely everything in recent years. They tended to be experts on pandemics first, then they were experts on vaccine policy, then they were experts on how to withdraw from Afghanistan, they were experts on Ukraine, and now they're experts on Rafah. It's amazing how much expertise there is among idiot people. But it's very striking to me because you can actually tell an awful lot by what somebody focuses on obsessively. And if you've decided that Gaza and Israel's reaction to the 7th and the attempt to get back the hostages and the attempt to punish by killing or capturing the leaders of Hamas is somehow the thing that is going to most energize you, again, I could have some sympathy if those people had ever expressed any concern about the much greater, infinitely greater humanitarian catastrophes which are going on as I speak.
The focus on Rafah and Gaza is not about selective outrage or sudden expertise, but rather a response to the immediate and visible suffering of civilians caught in a conflict with disproportionate power dynamics. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza demands attention due to the intensity of violence, blockades, and civilian casualties. Comparing this situation to other global conflicts misses the point that moral concern can exist for multiple issues simultaneously, and highlighting the devastation in Gaza doesn't negate caring for other humanitarian crises. Rather, the public's focus on Gaza reflects a need for accountability and justice in a situation where civilians are disproportionately affected.
Extraordinary thought that, again, an extraordinary place you can come to where you decide, I'm for anyone so long as they're against us. I'm for anyone as long as they're against the values that my society holds dear. I'm for anyone so long as they're against, and I would say that you can insert at that point the word, the Jews. Extraordinary thing in Israel in recent months has been that sometimes not only a flare goes up, but sometimes a crack happens in the universe. You suddenly get a very, very clear glimpse into true human evil. And we in the West have been very, very lucky in our lifetimes to very rarely glimpse that. And when we have glimpsed it, occasionally, in this country, in Paris, Manchester, and elsewhere, we tend to brush it aside or push it past us and hope we don't see it again. But in Israel on the 7th, something shattered over the whole of the society. It didn't matter whether the people in the south of Israel were Orthodox Jews or Ashkenazi or Sephardi or secular or Reform. It didn't matter what color their skin was, that they were the targets because they were Jews.
The assumption that anyone opposing Israel automatically sides with terrorism or opposes Western values oversimplifies the motivations of millions of people who critique Israeli policies based on concerns over the treatment of Palestinians, rather than harboring anti-Jewish sentiments. Furthermore, the moral outrage many feel over atrocities in Israel does not negate the simultaneous outrage over other global injustices, such as the mistreatment of LGBTQ+ individuals in Yemen. Murray conflates criticism of Israel with antisemitism, failing to distinguish between opposition to state policies and hatred of Jewish people. This kind of reductionist thinking stifles legitimate debate about how to address the Israeli-Palestinian conflict without demonizing one side or the other.
Perhaps above all else, the reason why anti-Semitism is an issue that needs to be discussed and thought about is because, of course, as all historians know, it is the most reliable precursor, the most reliable guide. If anti-Semitism flares up in a society and is tolerated, and Jews can't go safely down the streets of cities like this one, it is the sign that the society is in decay and that everybody else will be next. The curse of the Jewish people is to be the canary in this coal mine. But the world's desire to shoot the canary seems to me to be perverse, at any rate.
While anti-Semitism is undoubtedly dangerous and must be confronted, it is not the only indicator of societal problems. Other forms of discrimination, such as racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, and homophobia, also signal decay and deserve equal attention in assessing societal well-being. By focusing solely on anti-Semitism, Murray neglects the broader spectrum of systemic injustices that threaten social cohesion. Societies in decline often show multiple signs of intolerance, and addressing one form of bigotry without considering others limits our understanding of what truly erodes social stability. This critique of Douglas Murray's views highlights his oversimplification of complex issues like anti-Semitism and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. While Murray raises valid concerns about anti-Semitism and terrorism, his framing often conflates criticism of Israel with hatred of Jews, dismissing legitimate concerns over human rights in Gaza. Addressing anti-Semitism requires acknowledging broader systemic injustices, and by focusing solely on one issue, Murray overlooks the need for a more comprehensive approach to combating all forms of discrimination. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, smash that like button, share with friends, and subscribe for more. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going.